there's one point in life where I can give this a real go, it's now, because I was 21 and sure, I had no money, but I also had no responsibilities either. I had no children. I just thought, what's the worst that can happen? Like, I feel like a lot of people have a hugely ingrained sense of perfectionism, which is, when they launch their very first thing, they want it to be incredible. They want it to be perfect. They want it to be something that people are proud of. I think that is something that often thwarts people. You can do quite a lot with quite a little if you put your mind to it. So no, £200 is enough to sort of build a basic website, and that's all you need a lot of the time to sort of prove out a couple of your core concepts. In terms of advice I would give to younger people that are trying to explore this as a sector, it would be try and almost pilot it before you get going. If you're studying at university, there's no reason why you can't start launching your own initiatives and getting a taste for what it might be like to be an entrepreneur, even if you're at school.
Today's guest is very inspiring. He's a technology entrepreneur and a social commentator. He has his own startup, a technology startup helping young people that has raised millions in funding. He is also Forbes 30 under 30, which is an incredible achievement for a young person. He's also won an award for Minister's Points of Light by the Prime Minister of the UK for the social impact in education. But he's also received a Diana Award for the same cause, which is social impact for education. I am very, very humbled and honored to welcome Joe Seddon to the group. Welcome to the show, Joe. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'd love to start by asking you, what's your origin story? Give us a little bit of a background, your upbringing, and then obviously, your university life, and then what you do today.
Sure. So I grew up in a small town in West Yorkshire called Morley, which is between Leeds and Wakefield, if you've ever been to that part of the country before. It's one of those places that most people couldn't place on a map, and I was from a single parent background, so I was raised by my mum, 2 younger siblings, and when I was growing up I was just sort of a normal kid from West Yorkshire. I loved football, and my first sort of dream as a child was to be a football player, and by the age of 13 I probably realised that wasn't going to be a realistic route for me. And I was also really passionate about technology. I grew up in an era in which the internet was starting to disrupt every facet of life, and it sounds cliche, but I remember watching online as Steve Jobs unveiled the iPhone, and all these incredible new apps came out like Facebook and Twitter that completely changed the way that I communicated to my friends, and I thought this was something that I wanted to be part of. So I was a bit of a weirdo who sort of used to get home from school in the evenings and sort of teach myself how to code, and listen to podcasts about what was happening in Silicon Valley, even though Silicon Valley felt like a very different reality to where I was growing up in West Yorkshire. So technology was very much a passion of mine. But I decided to go to university rather than go straight into the world of startups. And I actually studied something that had nothing to do with technology whatsoever. I studied philosophy, politics, and economics. And the reason I did that is I had a wide range of interests, and I just wanted to kind of understand how the world works. I thought studying 3 subjects rather than one was a good way to do that. I think one of the things that's quite strange about the British academic system is we force everyone to specialise so early.
Right.
I didn't want to be that person, and I went to Oxford University, which was incredible, but a very alien environment versus where I grew up. Meeting people from lots of different backgrounds. Going to formal hall on Friday and dressing up in a gown and doing weird traditions and mystical routines that most people regard as silly. But after a difficult start, I eventually lapped it up, and yeah. And by the end of university, a lot of my friends were starting to get ready to go into their corporate careers, but I knew that was not something I really wanted to do. So I decided to launch my own startup instead, and that's how I got here today, I suppose.
Amazing, yeah. I want to go back to before you chose to go to university, and specifically Oxford, right? Because it's not an easy feat to get into one of these Russell Group universities, or specifically Oxbridge. Was there any help available, or was it totally on your own accord, just trying to work it out and figure out while you go, or was there a lot of help?
So I was always a very self-motivated person, right from early in my childhoods. There's a recent study that came out a couple of weeks ago actually, which looked at the profile of a lot of entrepreneurs and politicians, and found that people from single parent backgrounds are actually disproportionately overrepresented in a lot of very competitive professions that require a lot of resilience and grit to make it through. And I certainly felt that in my life, where I've been sort of growing up in that situation. It gave me that sort of burning desire inside, and that sort of sense of independence to really try and push my own destiny. And I started thinking about university when I got to the age of 16. I got a good set of GCSE results, and it was at that point that I thought maybe Oxford was the sort of place I could apply. But there was no real support, and no one in my family had been to Oxbridge before. There was no real legacy in my local area of getting into the university. Even looking at the data, in the year that I left Oxford, not a single person from my local authority got an offer to study there. So to go to a university like that for someone like me was very much out of the ordinary. And the internet really was my only route to being able to get in. The internet to some degree leveled the playing field in terms of access to information. I could read about the application process online, follow YouTubers from similar backgrounds to my own who'd made it through the process. So there was lots of information out there. I think what was really missing though was what I sometimes call that hot knowledge, and be able to sit down and have a one-to-one conversation with someone to get the inside track, someone to sort of coach you over time, and that is something that I didn't really have, and the internet at that time, just by watching YouTube videos and doing online research, couldn't necessarily give me out of the box.
Internet is I guess can be boon and a curse, and if you put it to the right use, it can work for you really well, and this is a great example of that, right? If I fast forward to, okay, well, you finish uni and you said like your friends were going into, all these amazing jobs and different careers, but you decided to start up on your own. Why choose the entrepreneurial path when, just get a job and have a quote unquote easy life?
I think my friends and my family, to be fair as well, thought I was completely crazy. In my second year of university, I did a couple of internships, one at a big law firm in London called Slaughter & May, and I won a training contract there, and the sort of money you get paid in commercial law, especially as a young person, is completely unfathomable to most people. And I think my friends assumed when I got the training contract that would be my career and I was set up for life. And then to hear that I'd turned it down, most of them thought I'd gone completely insane, and I'm not sure my family were particularly happy about it either. But for me, I'd always been somebody who wanted to take risks and be audacious, and like I said, I was passionate about technology, and growing up I'd really tried to immerse myself in the sort of the online culture around the tech sector, and I thought if there's one point in life where I can give this a real go, it's now, because I was 21, and sure, I had no money, but I also had no responsibilities either. I had no children. I just thought, what's the worst that can happen? No, I'm going to move back home to my childhood bedroom in West Yorkshire. And yes, it's not particularly glamorous whilst my friends are all moving to London and starting their new lives, and they're going to incredible restaurants and doing really cool stuff. But this is a risk that I'm willing to take. And if it all goes wrong, hopefully with my university degree, I'll have something to fall back on. But it was a big risk at the time, and I think one of the reasons why entrepreneurship tends to be dominated by people from more affluent backgrounds is you can have a higher risk tolerance if you're someone who's affluent and you've got something to fall back on, and that's something that I reflect on now. In many ways, I was an outlier in that regard, as somebody who wasn't from a super wealthy background who was willing to take a risk. But that is the reason that entrepreneurship, unfortunately, is dominated by the wealthy.
I was going to ask that, people from less privileged backgrounds, don't take bigger risks because it's quite personal to them, and they can't take risks because, as you said, there's no fallback, right? And you being the outlier, what have you learned, and would you suggest this to other young people who are coming from less privileged backgrounds that follow the entrepreneurship path versus a job path? Yeah. Nothing wrong with taking a job, by the way, just saying, this is another path that you can take right after uni.
100%. There's nothing wrong with taking a job, and I would never be somebody who would give a blanket piece of advice, which is, no, you should quit your corporate job and go straight into entrepreneurship, because the fact is that isn't right for everyone. And like I said, that risk piece is so deeply ingrained. Now, if you come from a small town in West Yorkshire where the standard way of doing things is to go to school, get married to your sort of childhood sweetheart, and probably buy a house a couple of minutes from where you grew up, and work sort of the same type of job, don't do a big career switch, then it's natural that it's less likely that you would go into something like entrepreneurship. Whilst in a huge urban metropolis like London, it's more normal not only to be an entrepreneur, but to live a life which is more conducive to going into an entrepreneurship. Career switching is more normal. People tend to have a broader social network, and those are all resources that you need when you go into entrepreneurship. So in terms of advice I would give to younger people that are trying to explore this as a sector, it would be try and almost pilot it before you get going. Now, if you're studying at university, there's no reason why you can't start launching your own initiatives and getting a taste for what it might be like to be an entrepreneur. Even if you're at school, there's no reason for you to stop. I feel like a lot of people have a hugely ingrained sense of perfectionism, which is, when they launch their very first thing, they want it to be incredible. They want it to be perfect. They want it to be something that people are proud of. I think that is something that often thwarts people getting going. And I know certainly when I moved back home to West Yorkshire and launched my startup, it was rubbish at first. And if you sort of compared our website today versus what it looked like 4 years ago, and they use that time capsule website, you'll see it will look dramatically different in terms of professionalism, tone of voice, copy, everything. And you just have to be prepared at the beginning to almost lower your embarrassment threshold and launch something into the world that isn't going to be perfect, because you'll be starting with very little limited resources, but it's something that's going to actually allow you to get going.
Right. Yeah, it's that typical thing about, if you go for perfect, you will never get there. But if you just do it and improve and iterate, you'll actually go further. So it's just taking that first step and then keep going is basically the advice. And funny, I say that because a lot of people just focus on to get it right from the first go, but it's not about that. It's about failing and learning and making mistakes and learning and taking risks and learning, right? And it's good to kind of hear that from someone who's done it. So thanks for sharing. Yeah,
I think this is a big issue in the UK in particular, because the sort of British mentality is to avoid embarrassment through whatever means possible. I feel like British people are very proud, and there is not a culture of failure in this country in the same way there is in the US, for instance, where failure in many ways is glamorized and it's celebrated, and that's great from a entrepreneurship perspective, where you have to fail in order to incrementally improve. But in Britain, the culture is very much diametrically opposed to that, and I think that is a big issue. And I remember when I got going with my own startup, and at the beginning it was a little bit like I said, we didn't have the best website, and we didn't have the best technology, and we didn't have the best marketing. Now, I was constantly feeling nervous about what other people would think about what I was doing, so I was well aware that it wasn't the best representation of what it could be. And now I look back and I think I really wish I hadn't felt like that, because that probably stopped me from moving even faster. And one of the key messages I always tell young entrepreneurs is you just have to lower your embarrassment threshold, and you have to be willing to experiment and do things that aren't always gonna work.
Yeah. I mean, it's never easy being an entrepreneur and starting up, because there's no guarantees. There's no paycheck coming at the end of the month, right? So it's a big leap. And if you go back to your first few years and until now, I guess, really, what are your big learnings?
I think so. I got going with the first £200 of my student loan. So when I finished university, everyone in the UK gets a maintenance loan, and I was also lucky to get a grant from Oxford, a means-tested grant that allowed me to survive university. I had £200 left, and I used that as my seed capital to get going. And I knew that in the entrepreneurship community, especially around London, there was this sort of concept of doing a friends and family funding round, which I thought was quite bizarre, because I thought if I do a whip round of my friends and family, I'm probably going to raise around 100 quid maximum, and maybe a Freddo or something. And the idea of being able to raise £100,000 to just test out my idea was just something that was completely unfathomable at that point. So I got going on £200, but I think you can do quite a lot with quite a little if you put your mind to it. So £200 is enough to sort of build a basic website, get some web hosting, buy a couple of SaaS products that are going to allow you to get going, and that's all you need a lot of the time to sort of prove out a couple of your core concepts. But the first 6 months definitely was tough. I couldn't pay myself. I had to do other things on the sides to be able to survive. But eventually I was able to get to a point where with the initial £200, I had built something that was able to actually attract proper investment. And I knew nothing about startup equity investment when I started off, and I had to sort of learn a lot of it on the fly. And one of the things that really stuck out for me was how in the UK, I think things have changed a little bit over the past 4 years, but not enough. The investment community is way too centred in London. I had to move from West Yorkshire to London to be able to grow my business, because I was getting these meeting requests from interesting, influential people living in London, potential investors in my business, and all of them were based in sort of around a 2-3 mile radius, and I was constantly having to hop on the train, and that in and of itself was incredibly expensive. So eventually I had to move to London, and I think that is the case for a lot of UK based entrepreneurs, where a lot of those entrepreneurs who want to grow businesses on the tech startup model, where you raise funding, feel like they have to leave their towns where they grew up in order to do that, and that shouldn't really be the case.
Yeah, it's amazing though that you come from £200 to now millions in funding, right? With Zero Gravity, your firm, your startup. Tell us about Zero Gravity, because it's helping young people, and you've won some award around social impact, including the one from the Prime Minister as well. So would love to know how Zero Gravity is helping young people, and what are the key things that you've found so far in talking to young people, and what help they need.
Sure. So I built a business in many ways to solve my own problem, which is always one of the best ways to get started. I feel that a lot of young entrepreneurs make a mistake, which is they think that starting a business is a bit like having that Isaac Newton moment where you're sort of sat under a tree and suddenly an apple falls and hits you on the head, and you have the next great big idea. But most businesses start with solving quite a personal problem, and that is how Zero Gravity was born. So like I mentioned, I grew up in a small town in West Yorkshire. There wasn't very much access to opportunity. I saw all of these barriers stopping talented people in the education system from reaching top institutions, and I wanted to do something about it. And technology has disrupted so many other sectors of the economy, whether it's getting sushi delivered to your desk in 20 minutes, or being able to travel around a city like London by pushing a button on your phone. And I thought, why has technology not yet disrupted how we identify the best talent from low-income backgrounds and support it to succeed? And I built Zero Gravity very much to be the answer to that problem. So we're a digital platform that uses the algorithmic technology to spot top potential whilst it's still at school. And then once we've identified those students, we bring them onto our digital platform, where they receive mentorship, masterclasses, and become part of a membership community of like-minded people. I think having a fantastic network is something that you can't take for granted. And if you live in a fantastic metropolis like London, or come from a sort of wealthy circuit, that's just something that you inherit by virtue of birth. But there's no reason why, if you grow up in a small town in the UK and you're really ambitious and you're really talented, you shouldn't also have access to a great network. So that's something that we also build for our students as well.
I always find it really fascinating with amount of information and help and support and all the greatness that you have available on the internet today versus when I was in school or university. And I almost feel a bit jealous with the young people now that I had to literally dig everything out and find information, because it wasn't available on the internet wasn't a thing almost. But it's incredible, and I think this is why we've started this podcast, because even though there is a lot of help available, like information available, unless you sit there for hours and days and months even, digging through all this complex amount of information, it's not, you can't get through, right? And I guess it sounds like zero gravity is trying to do that basically, and you did that for yourself, right? So if you think about like the key issues that you've faced when you speak to young people trying to get into Oxbridge or Russell Group universities or even get jobs, what are the one or two or three big asks from the young people today?
Yeah, it's similar to what you said actually, which is I feel like the internet has been a great leveler in terms of democratizing access to information. But what you don't necessarily have is the ability to navigate your way through information, and that is often what young people talk about. They'll say, "No, I want to get into Oxford University. I've Googled how to get in. I've read the official admissions advice on the website, and I know I have to do this test and write a personal statement, and there's an interview. But how does it really work? And like, what are the things, like the three things that I need to do in order to get there?" And if you have a fantastic mentor in your life who's been through that process themselves, that's something that you just have on tap. And that's something that our platform tries to give people. So if you're a 17-year-old and you want to go to an Oxford or a Cambridge university, our platform will match you with a mentor who's a current undergrad at that university. They've been through exactly the same process as you a couple of years ago. And they can be the person who you meet with for 1 hour per week through our platform, who gives you that sort of navigating advice. It's like, this week you should be reading these things, and if you're interested in this, take a look at this video online. And if you want to improve this skill which you need for your admissions test, these are three things you can read. And navigation is so important. And that's why we've sort of built the platform to really make mentorship as accessible as possible, and do it in a completely digital way. So if you're a 17-year-old who lives in Sunderland, you don't need to jump in your car and travel 2 hours to get access to a mentor. You can just access them anytime, anywhere through your mobile phone.
You talk about mentors and accessibility through your platform, but how can you explain why mentors matter? And how do you find one? I mean, of course, like through your digital platform, but then a lot of people might not know about your platform. So if you can talk about generally what is the role of a mentor, and if they don't use your platform, of course we want them to use your platform, but if they don't want to use their platform, how can they find a mentor?
Sure. Mentors are incredibly important. I know from my own life that I've benefited immeasurably from the power of mentors, whether it's the mentor that I met in the pub when I came to London, who was the first person to sort of really back my entrepreneurship journey, or whether it's the various the people I've met alongside along that journey who've given me really key bits of advice at certain really key points that have sort of sent me in a completely different direction. So mentorship is so powerful. And I think the reason it's powerful is twofold. One is sort of substance, in terms of mentors can give you really good advice that would take you years to learn yourself. Someone who's been through exactly the same process as you, as not only knows the sort of tricks of how to succeed, but also knows where they went wrong before and where they failed. So they can sort of almost stop you from making the same mistakes that they made, and really allow you to concentrate on the things that are going to really make a difference. And I think the second thing is just like moral support as well. Now, having a mentor in your life who can be that person who you just turn to when you've had a really bad week and something's gone wrong, and can sort of almost just make you feel more empowered again, is so powerful in and of itself. And any sort of competitive process, whether it's applying to university or getting a job or growing a business, naturally it has a process where your motivation is going to wax and wane. And having someone there who can provide that moral support is so important. In terms of how you find the best mentors, I think part of it is about finding someone who's been through on the same journey as you, but you can still sort of resonate with. So it's always best to have a mentor who's almost one or two steps ahead. I think some people picture in their mind when they think of a perfect mentor, like a sort of Elon Musk
Right.
style figure. But the issue with that is A, he's not going to have very much time, and B, he's almost so successful, no, blow away successful now, that a lot of the problems that you'll be facing are ones that he wouldn't have had to deal with in around 20, 30 years. So it's best to have a mentor who you can resonate with. So if you're someone who's applying to university, the best mentor is often a current undergrad or postgrad there. And if you're someone who's applying for a career, the best mentor is often someone who's in the early part of their career, who went through that same application process a couple of years ago. And if you're an entrepreneur, it's often best to have a mentor who's maybe 2 steps ahead of you in terms of company growth, and it is somebody who's a billionaire. So look for resonant mentors, not just successful ones.
Yeah, it's such a powerful and simple advice that just find people who are, in your own shoes and they've done it in recent times, so they can, teach you and you can learn from them, right? A lot of the times, like I've fallen trap of this as well. Like, oh, I'm gonna go for like the CEO when I was a lot younger as my mentor. I'll go ask them for advice, but actually, what they are experiencing today versus what you're experiencing today, what you need help with is like day and night, right? So that resonates with me personally, but also I can totally kind of see how young people would get help from this as well. This is following someone who's actually just done it recently. So
yeah, but it's a hard question, and that's why we've developed technology at Zero Gravity to almost answer that question and make it easier for people, because it's not natural that you would know what to look for in a mentor or how to find one. So the way our technology works is, we've essentially developed a mentor matching algorithm, which looks for things that we know drive successful mentoring relations in terms of making a match between people. So from our data, we know that people who share the same gender tend to have more strongly engaged mentor matches, because there's a really key characteristic which drives resonance between people. And same with geographic location. The people who grew up in the same area, on average, tend to have more engaged long-term mentoring relationships, because they can relate to each other's experience. So and we've built an algorithm that automatically looks for all of these different pieces. And the beauty of technology is that algorithm isn't static and is constantly learning, because we have a digital platform where we can track these relationships and look at the outcomes of them. That we're learning more and more over time about what a really powerful mentoring relationship is. So the algorithm is self-learning in that way. And that's super, super exciting, because the more people we have on the platform going through these journeys, the better the technology gets for everyone. So it's almost like your own individual success has a social mission in and of itself, where if you're on our platform, they're doing all the things you need to break into a top university or career, you're actually helping to build the product that's going to help the next generation of people like you.
what makes a good mentor?
Again, I think mentoring's really difficult. I think everyone believes in the power of mentoring and the abstract. Like when you speak to a lot of people who've been very successful in a particular vertical, they'll often talk about one or two really key mentors that help them in their journey. But actually doing mentoring, either individually or at scale across a community of people, is pretty tough, because some people naturally are incredible mentors, but even some incredible individuals who are incredibly high powered in their job role can make awful mentors if they don't have the right training. And I think in terms of what makes a good mentor, I think that the key is the start of the mentoring relationship. Like mentoring is like a muscle. You have to build it over time and make sort of conditioning that muscle habitual. So one of the first thing I would do as a mentor is make sure you set the pace early doors. Like, when are you going to meet, and on what cadence are you going to meet? Is it going to be a once a month sort of thing, or is it going to be a once a week sort of relationship? And the cadence you set is going to affect how it works, right? If it's a weekly mentoring relationship, it can maybe be a little more organic and unstructured. But if it's a once a month style relationship, you're going to want to prepare really deeply before you have that sort of 1 hour session to make sure you get the most out of it. So I think setting a cycle is super key. I think the other thing for being a really good mentor is listening. I think often as a mentor, one of the things you can bring to the relationship is your own experience, but you should also remember that the person you're speaking to is unique and idiosyncratic in and of themselves. It's really important that you listen to the problem that they're facing and ask lots of questions. Like, often the best mentoring relationships are very balanced in terms of it's not just one person who does all the speaking. And often as a mentor, one of the best ways you can mentor someone is almost by doing mentoring in reverse, which is, asking the young person or the person who's the mentee lots of questions and attempting to learn from them. Because if you sort of take that attitude towards mentorship, it's likely that the advice you give will be more specific to the person.
I love that. I have had the privilege to mentor quite a lot of young students at the university that I went to, but also outside as well. And as much as, I've shared my experience, I have, you have to keep an open mind, right? Because you want to learn. It's a two-way street. And I have learned so much just by making sure that I'm not only just speaking, but also asking questions and, making sure I dedicate time to learn about what they care about and what their problems are and, what I can share. But then also, they have a lot to share with me as well. So, yeah, I mean, the last bit is so important because ultimately it's a relationship, right? It's not just a tick box like, okay, well, I've done a monthly, weekly session and it's done. You're literally, if you want to have a successful mentor or mentee relationship, you need to invest time, effort, and, the relationship is just like a marriage, basically, except, you don't have kids or anything else. Nothing wrong with that. I have kids. I am married. But yeah, thanks for that. I want to switch gears to another powerful thing that, you talk about, and I've read your, insights on the Times and BBC that you've given before, and you talk about networking and the power of networking. What do you suggest to the young people via Zero Gravity, or even before that, or even your own experience? What does networking do to you, and is it important, and how do you do it?
I think networking is one of those phrases which, again, British people often talk about in a very disdainful way. Because even though everybody knows that having a fantastic network can be so powerful in terms of helping you achieve your goals, it almost feels a bit dirty to talk about networks. So I feel in this country we sort of have this myth of meritocracy that we all want to believe in, and the idea that people achieve things based on their own talents and skills rather than how they're able to mobilize other people within their network to help them get there. So again, I think there's this peculiar British thing where we're very averse to talking about networking and teaching it as a skill, which in many ways backfires, because that means that networking is often the preserve of those who understand its true value. And you can see that if you look at the data in the UK, networks drive so much across so many different components of life. There was actually recently a study by the Office of National Statistics in the UK which looked at the wealth gap in this country, and they sort of did all of these complicated regressions about what is it that's driving this gap, and they found that only 42% of it could be put down to what you achieve in the education system in the country. And when they look at the other components, a lot of them were network driven phenomenons. They were like, who was your sort of first boss in the workplace, what do your family and friends do in their career. So having a fantastic network is really powerful in terms of your long-term career growth. And in terms of how you can build a network, I think the most difficult part is getting started. Like any sort of network-based product, the bigger your network gets, the more powerful and self-reinforcing it gets, right? It's a bit like launching Facebook. Now Facebook has 1 billion users, and everyone has to be on Facebook, right? Because that's where everyone is. But at the beginning, when Facebook had no users, getting your first 10 people to join your platform is really difficult, because why would anybody be part of that? And networks are the same. Building that network at the beginning is the most difficult part you're going to have to do. But once you get past that point, your network then will become self-reinforcing. So my sort of advice to young people would be, when you're getting started, put yourself in positions where the opportunity will begin to find you. So attend as many events as possible, and when you meet people, don't just meet them once and never talk to them ever again. If you meet someone who you think was interesting, add them on LinkedIn afterwards, and arrange a follow-up meeting. And these all sound like very basic things, and they are, but I think there's a natural aversion in this country to doing that kind of stuff, and it really holds people back. And that's how you see these massive disparities getting driven in terms of access to a network, where some people seem to have a fantastic network and most people seem to have no network at all.
It's a very clear distinction between what you know and who you know, right? And it's not about you need one or the other, you need a bit of both, right? And that's basically sort of the power of networking, that if you are really good at what you do, and if you're successful in a certain way, what you know, you can leverage that and build those networks so that you can, I guess, spread your success, spread your learnings, or whatever you're trying to share, right? When you think about sort of the people that you worked with, the mentors or the networks that you've built, what is the best advice that you've gotten so far?
Oh, I've had a lot of really good advice over the years. I think the thing that's always really stayed with me, and this is a piece of advice I got early on, and it actually came from one of the biggest mentors in my life, which was someone who I just randomly met in a London pub one time. But it was start with why. And it goes back to, a lot of people have seen that Simon Sinek talk online where he talks about the power of why in terms of branding and marketing. But the context of this advice was just about generally how you get stuff done, which is always start with why. I think a lot of people make the mistake when they have a problem, whether it's a problem to solve in terms of how you get a business to partner with you, or how you raise investment, or like how you solve a legal issue you've got. People always naturally tend to treat it like an academic problem, because that's how the education system teaches you to think about the world. But actually, most problems at their heart have human beings, and what drives human beings is why, the intentions, and what matters to people in life. And I think in any situation, if you start to think more about the motivation of the person you're dealing with rather than the problem itself, and almost use that as your first principle, you're far more likely to get progress than you would otherwise. And I've seen this play out in a number of different parts of my life. I remember when I started Zero Gravity, and I was thinking about how we're going to get clients to use our platform. I thought the way to solve that challenge initially was intellectual. Create the best possible slide deck going, or write the most beautiful long-winded essay-like email about why my product is so good and why you must use it. And the issue with that is it doesn't think about the end consumer, who's someone who's inside one of these firms who has to make a decision. And when you actually think about what is it that motivates that person, how do they like to be contacted, like what are their sort of hopes and fears, and how do you cater to those? I found that was such a great way of actually starting to get progress. It's almost when I sort of took things back and sort of thought a bit more simply, rather than treating everything like an intellectual problem to be squashed, that I started to make some progress.
That's a very powerful advice for sure. Yeah, start with why. And I love that Simon Sinek talk. It really hits it home, because you tend to start with the what, and then you go into the deep end of everything. But really, if you start with the why, the what becomes very easy, and then of course the how becomes even easier, right? So thanks for sharing. I mean, everything that you're saying not only resonates with me personally, but resonates with a lot of young people I've spoken to. You're giving very practical advice, and everything that you're trying to do to help the young people and have that social impact, it's quite incredible. So again, thank you for coming on the show. I mean, we can talk on this for hours, right? But I have to finish somewhere. So one of the last questions that I ask to every guest is, if you are young again, I mean, you're a lot younger than me. So if you're like 16 or 18, going back to you just finished uni, or even before you started uni, trying to decide what to do, what would be the advice to your younger self? So, dear Joe.
Sure. So if I could send my sort of 14-year-old self a message, I think, as I said, when I was growing up, I was really interested in technology. I used to listen to all of these podcasts, and I remember at the time that Bitcoin was becoming a thing, and I was obsessed with the story of, where is Satoshi Nakamoto. So if I was going to give myself one really practical piece of advice, it would be go back in time and actually buy some Bitcoin rather than just listen to a podcast about it. But in all seriousness, if I was to give myself some advice, it would be to be more audacious. I think growing up in a small town in the UK, it can often feel like it's impossible to defy the odds. And I was always someone who was ambitious, and I wanted to live in many ways an extraordinary life. But I remember there was times when my motivation really disappeared, and I thought that it wasn't possible to launch a business. And I remember even when I launched Zero Gravity, there was a number of moments where I thought this just really isn't going to work, and I did honestly think about packing it up a number of times. But my advice to my younger self would be, be audacious and don't expect everything to happen straight away. It's easy to sort of sit in this chair now 4 years later and sort of tell a success story of starting with £200 and growing a business off the back of that. But the reality is, in the early months, it was incredibly tough, and it required relentless focus and almost to some degree naive, blind optimism and bordering on delusion to keep going, even though the odds were so stacked heavily against me. So my advice would be audacious, and even when things don't come together straight away, just don't give up, because anything that's worth chasing and doing in life never happens overnight.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing all the insights, and thank you for actually caring about young people. So that's what this show is about. So I appreciate all the work that you do.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm gonna shake your hands on that. Cool.